You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
Yancey and Kara Dawson, welcome to our podcast. Yancey, it's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. Appreciate it.
Kara, I'm so glad you're here. This is your first time, right?
Yes, for sure.
It's always a little intimidating. There's cameras and lights, but it's going to be really fun. I'm excited about it. This is our last episode when we're talking about the Enneagram. We're talking about Enneagram 8 and 9.
Yep.
And no one is surprised to hear that Yancey is an Enneagram 8.
What?
If you know anything about it.
I thought I was a 1. An 8,
Wrong
yes.
podcast.
I'm an 8.
And Kara is an Enneagram 9.
Yes.
And so we're going to hear just a little bit about how you see the world, some of your challenges and your superpowers as this type of person. But before we even do that, Yancey, we talked at the beginning of this podcast series with Bruce a little bit about, just what the Enneagram is and why we think it can be helpful, but what it is and what it isn't. And since you're here today, I wanted to hear a little bit about your perspective when it comes to that. Not even just the Enneagram, but things like the Enneagram. How should we think about things like this as disciples of Jesus?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to recognize that Christians all across the spectrum have different perspectives and convictions about the things they want to entertain that are produced by the world. And when I just say world, I just mean the secular world. It's not produced by the church. And so that could be anything. That can be technology. That can be science. That can even be psychology. And so we have a little bit of that here with the Enneagram. The Enneagram, for those of you who don't know, and just for the record, I'm not an expert on it. I'm not as studied in it, only because, it really doesn't even matter. It's a personality test. There's the Myers-Briggs. There's 1,000 different personality examinations that allow us to put people into categories or into types whereby we can understand them better because they generally have a similar way of thinking. So the Enneagram does that with, 9 different categories. A long time ago, our church, we used to use a somewhat similar diagnostic, but we used animals, and there was only 4. And so we didn't get that from the scriptures. It's not like, hey, we looked in Revelation, and there's a lion, there's an eagle. I mean,
that would be cool, though.
That would be kind of cool. But this is just one of those kind of tools. And so Clear Creek historically, and all the way up to today, our philosophical position is we're an integrationist. In other words, like, we want to be able to see what the world has out there, whether it's personality profiles or microphones or technology, and we want to be able to chew that up, swallow the meat and spit out the bones. And so that means that calls for a level of high discernment, but we're also highly engaged in the culture. And so we feel that that's the best way that God calls us to be followers of Jesus. And so the Enneagram is one of those things where we've looked at it in the past, seems to be helpful. Our experience was, I believe Bruce mentioned this, the first time I ever was exposed to this was from a pastoral care ministry, and leadership ministry, where we had some people come in to work with our executive staff, and they just gave us this diagnostic called the Enneagram. I didn't know anything about it. I just answered questions, and there you were. So that's kind of our position on it. Now, I understand that there may be some people here that feel maybe they have a more conservative position. I don't even know if I want to qualify it as conservative. They just may have a position where, Enneagram's not my deal. Cool. Don't let it be your deal. We've just kind of been very open-handed, and that's really kind of par for the course for Clear Creek. I mean, we love to get all excited about a lot of different things, and then there's other things that we're kind of like, hey, we'll just engage that if it's helpful, and if it's not, we won't. And anything that's against the scriptures is an automatic out. But anything that we can see that Philippians says is true, good, beautiful, right, we want to be able to engage that and not just go, well, let's just dismiss it out of hand, because we're not fundamentalists. And that's what fundamentalists do. So in all things, I don't mean just Enneagram. There are great, good Christians that are great with the Enneagram, some that aren't. We've just been open to that to go, hey, if that helps us learn more about how we can know ourselves so we can be better followers of Jesus. I know that in this series, you've been really applying the gospel grid, our spiritual formation grid. How can knowing us a little bit better help us be better followers of Jesus? I'm all in. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. Hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And just from the perspective of what we're trying to do with Clear Creek Resources in general is, we used to say a lot, maybe we should say again, we're trying to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
And so part of what we want to do is have conversations that people are having all throughout the week through the lens of the gospel and the church and Jesus Christ. And so we hope that's what we're doing with this is, the Enneagram doesn't save, Jesus saves.
Right.
The Enneagram doesn't transform you, the Holy Spirit transforms you. In community, in the church, if you know the Enneagram better than you know your Bible, you should put it away and open up your Bible. I just want to affirm that, but also we just want to engage in these conversations that are already happening as the church. That's our goal. So
I would think also, just to add, I've never approached it. We've never approached the Enneagram as some kind of spiritual device. Mm-hmm. It's not divining kind of spiritual answers for us. It's an observational diagnostic that allows us to kind of categorize in ways that can be helpful. That's all. That's how I've seen it, and I'm like, all right, let's go for it. And whenever it doesn't do that well, then we don't lean into it that much. So, but I do think it's a fascinating conversation. I appreciate the stuff that you've been doing with all the other personality types. I'm just glad you finally got to the best one. So.
I was waiting for that. It took so long.
I wanted to play into the 8 a little bit, and with the 9 here. So, and just for the record, I know you've already said you're an 8 too. So let's not. You can't pull.
But
one
everyone's
over
surprised.
Yeah, exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
All right, so Kara, tell me just what is your experience with Enneagram? When did you first hear about it? Were you skeptical about it? What was your experience just walking through it and learning?
I think I learned about it like maybe 5 years ago. A friend told me about it, and I started reading, and it was pretty clear what I was. Just reading through it, I don't even know that I took a test initially. But for me, I liked it as a tool because as a 9, I love to learn about people and like why they do what they do and how I can love them. So it was good.
Yeah, it's so helpful for that purpose.
Yeah.
So let's just walk through some of the basic characteristics of an 8 and a 9 for people who have never heard of that. So Yancey, tell me a little bit about the 8. What's the 8 title? Do you know?
Well, Rachel and I have an ongoing joke that I don't know much about this, although I do. I know a little bit about it.
You do.
And
You do.
as you being an 8, you can help me where I've misstepped here. But I think, depending on which you ask, there's a couple of titles that stand out. The 8 is known as the powerful person or the challenger, and I resonate with at least one of those, the challenger. I don't know about the powerful person, but it is. Those are the things those are the titles usually given him. You may know more, but those are the two that stand out: challenger and powerful.
So describe someone who's an Enneagram 8.
So
just in general. I mean, because we know, this isn't going to describe everyone
Correct.
who's an 8. There's a lot of room here, but in general.
So generally speaking, 8s are, you can say, stereotyped or classed as people who are direct. They're very direct in how they speak. Truth's a big deal to them. They love their independence. They can tend to have a fierce confidence about them. And the reason I say fierce confidence is because they're not just confident; they exude that kind of confidence, and they can be very energetic, very busy. That they're good, at least as Enneagram says, good at doing a lot of different things because they feel like they have a competence in a lot of different things. They can be stubborn in a good way, stubborn in a bad way, headstrong in a good way, headstrong in a bad way. They're serious about justice issues. They don't like to see bad things happening, or I should say unjust or injustice happening to people that are innocent. That really messes them up. So I would say those are, and there's a lot more. I'm sure we'll walk through some of those as we go along, but that's, when I hear 8s described that way, I resonate with most all of that. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of the key characteristics among many when it comes to the 8s.
So, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Kara, tell me just, again, title of 9, what does that mean, and what does that look like, some of those general characteristics?
9 is the peacemaker, and that's, for me, that was very obvious. Yes, peace is definitely what drives me. That's what I seek at all times. So some characteristics of that would be we're typically pretty calm, like easygoing, laid back, get along with most people, find a way to get along with most people. Also can see both sides of a situation, which can be a blessing, can be a curse. We like to be around people. We're usually, all the 9s that I know are pretty easy laughers. We just like to have fun, and I guess we're good company because if you say something, we laugh. So also in seeking for peace, like we want peace internally and externally. And so that often is exhausting, just trying to manage that. And so then we can also be seen as lazy. We're hard to move, like we get stuck easily. So
when you say hard to move, you get stuck, does that mean emotionally stuck?
both. Anything that just requires like a hard decision,
Got it.
we
Got
can
it.
just, it's really hard to figure it out. And so we can just get stuck. And while we're independent, we also, when we're stuck, want help. And so I don't know. I think a lot of times we can be have total opposite. Like we have one desire, but then also the opposite desire, which is a little confusing.
Like you want to be with everyone, and it can be hard to make a decision. You want help, but you're also really independent.
Right.
Like that. Is that what you mean?
Right. Like
Yeah.
I want to be known, but I also don't know myself. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like we have a lot of contradictory things.
Yeah. Probably. Well, I don't know. Maybe that is unique to 9s. Do you think it is?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say at least for 8s, just to highlight one more characteristic where 9s might struggle with indecision. That's not a struggle for 8s. 8s are very decisive. I forgot to mention that in their traits, but they're very decisive. They've never met a decision that they couldn't make, and they don't have to belabor it. They make a decision, and they don't really ruminate too long about, was that the right decision? Was that the wrong decision? It's like, well, that's a decision, and if it's the wrong decision, well, then we'll make a better decision in the future. So maybe that would be a good way to contrast, at least in one respect, how a 9 might, get paralyzed almost in trying to make a decision where they're almost a little too indecisive, or at least that's how I might characterize it as an 8.
It's a challenge for them.
Where an
yeah.
8 would be like, yeah, we can make that decision. I'll make it for you.
Right.
Go there and do this. And so
Yeah.
that's just one way 8s are wired.
Right. And 9s have a hard time moving. 8s are usually always moving
Right.
because they just move forward all the time.
Right.
So one of my favorite things about this series, I think I said this on another one, is that we do have these two numbers together, and they have just happened to be pretty often pretty opposite
Right.
types of numbers. And that's helpful because even though everyone's not going to identify with every part of it, all of us are in relationships where we don't understand why the other person is doing what they're doing. So for an 8, who decisions are super easy for us, like, yes, this is the thing, and
I'm
if
glad
it's
you
the
said
wrong
for us.
thing,
I'm glad you finally
I
there
did
we
for
are.
us. Then, and if it's not the right thing, we just move on. But for a 9, it's just not that simple.
Right.
But whenever you have, like, in a marriage or friendship, those two things at the same time, I mean, that to me is part of what this is why it's a helpful conversation.
Right.
Is understanding where that comes from for both of us.
And cards on the table. I mean, she's married to an 8. I mean,
Right.
so
Right.
she gets to live with. She's at a table with 2 8s, but she lives with a guy who's an 8. So her husband.
Yeah, so I'll tell you if you guys were wrong.
I know, I was about to say, she's already thinking.
She already knows.
These are
She
all
can
the
probably
other things.
articulate the 8s better than I can. So.
All right, so tell me, for 8s, what's the primary desire of an 8? What is motivating all that energy, all that decision making, everything that an 8 does?
Well, I'd say, from what I understand, and some of this I struggle with, but because I'm not, I tend to think there's some other things in here, and I'll try to articulate. If you read about Enneagram 8s, it says that their greatest desire is to protect themselves and also to have control. And I think there's truth in that. I tend to think, at least as I look at my life being an 8, part of, at least intermingled with that, is to have an independence where you can, and I'm sure it's tied to control, where you can have, for example, like a project, like no one's going to mess with it. You get to have it from start to finish. You get to own all of it. You get to put your fingerprints on it because you really have a strong idea about where you want to go, what you want to do with it. And I think that which I probably would tie to control. I don't know about protection, but those things I think are the primary desires, at least I've seen in me. But it seems like when you ask Gates, it really is a desire to protect themselves and a desire for real control. And I think that can be a good or a bad thing.
Yeah. And we're going to get into how all of this intersects with our spiritual life as we are disciples of Jesus. And, you know, like you're saying, there's all these other things, birth order, like where you live, like your life story, all sorts of things, but also how that affects you as an 8 too. Makes a huge difference in what your desires and how that looks like is. So, Kara, tell me a little bit about 9s. What's the 9 primary motivation or desire? What's sort of the underlying thing behind all the characteristics you described?
It's the desire for peace, and it's both internal and external. And for me, those look different in, I guess, how I go about being intentional and trying to get that. Like internally, I like to be outside in nature and just seeing God's creation and just exploring, often by myself, but I can also be with people. But then externally, I'd say, like, I'm super intentional with my closest friends. And so, like, I want steadiness. I want reliability, that I know that they're going to assume the best of me, my friends, my family, all that. So, like, I think I probably limit relationships based on that because I know that piece is super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, I'm just like thinking through the difference between 8s and 9s. And I think 8s limit relationships too. But maybe for different reasons than that. It's not necessarily peace. It's maybe more of protection or something. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. I can only speak as an 8. I think part of it is 8s limit their relational circles to being a certain size because of they have trust issues. I say trust issues. I make it sound like they have all these struggles. No, they maybe because of control. I'm trying to think within the paradigm that we're working with an 8. You know, they don't want to have something that's going to cause something that would disrupt their ability to control the situation or feel like they're on point with this. And if they extend a relationship or open a door for the inner circle with someone that they can't trust, they don't trust, that feels real weird to them. It feels like, you know, I'm risking something here that I don't have to risk because I'm going to risk other things. And 8s really don't mind risking it. You know, they're not risk averse. Again, they're decisive, so they don't mind taking risks, but they want to take the right kind of risks. Relationally for them, because they do have a sense of independence, they get to they want to handpick who they want around them. Because I think one of at least the struggles, and I will talk about this later, but one of the struggles potentially for 8s is just the idea of vulnerability. And so they're just not going to be vulnerable with everybody. And it may be even a struggle to be vulnerable with their most inner circle. That's why they're very particular. They're going to control who they want in their inner circle. And so for them, you know, it's not about peace. I mean, geez, this is real. 8s really are different. But it is about.
Yeah, it's really not about peace.
Yeah, it's not about peace. So that's how I think I would characterize. They also may have smaller circles, but it's for. They have different motivations.
Right. Yeah. And for me, when I first started sort of walking through some of this and other things with understanding why I do the things I do, I don't know if I would have articulated before that I like have trust issues. And again, I don't really like that phrase either.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know, I do though. I'm sort of like wary of the world and people, you know, like it takes a while for me to really trust someone with everything.
Right.
Once I trust you, I'm all in, like I'm good to tell you anything and you're going to know me completely. But I do think there is some boundaries that 8 set up in a relationship and with everything else too.
You think the 8s set up, the boundaries they set up are fairly firm? So for an example, I know both of you are good friends with each other as well as with me, but I'm curious to know, like, Kara as a 9, and I don't want to characterize as one's better than the other, just the differences here, just so we can articulate this for people that are listening or watching. So you have someone in your inner circle, or maybe a secondary circle, someone who's a friend, but they break your trust. I'm curious how a 9 would respond. Like, I would forgive them rather quickly. I'd give them more rope, as opposed to an 8 that might say, because I'm just thinking for me, wow. That's a big deal. You break trust. It's hard for me to put you back in that circle. I might drop you 2 or 3 circles back. Still have a relationship with you. I don't hate you. I'm just saying. I'm curious how that would work if how much trust plays into it and how much broken trust, like, you're able to see beyond that as a 9.
I mean, I would say I'm pretty similar because, like, you've just created chaos in my world.
Oh,
and
so the opposite of peace.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, no. And, like, that's exhausting, and I already exhaust myself. So, I don't think I would have that much leeway.
Yeah, I wouldn't really have known that about someone who is a 9. I know that there are other types of personalities which they sort of struggle with the opposite, letting too many people in, being too dependent, emotionally connected to other people. That's their struggle, and I think for 8s, it can sort of be the opposite, like making sure you have really intimate, vulnerable relationships around you, because it's so important. I mean, especially when we start talking about being disciples, and relationally honest and real accountability is a huge part of our spiritual growth. So to recognize that that's a struggle for us is really important, for whatever reason it is. What would you say are the challenges of being a 9? And I know this is maybe repetitive, but what's the big challenge? And then tell me, what's the superpower of a 9?
There's probably 2 big challenges. One being not knowing themselves, like just kind of squashing your own desires and just not exploring what you really want and need. And, like, because you're just so focused externally on making other people happy and making your environment peaceful that, like, people ask me, like, both of you ask me questions like, what's your favorite this? What do you like about this? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't spend time exploring that, which is hard relationally. It's hard, making decisions. But then also conflict is just a difficult thing. Like, it's, if you want peace, you don't want conflict. And so becoming a Christian has helped me to get through that, but that's hard for, I think, most 9s, because it's just the opposite. You think it's the opposite of peace. It seems like the opposite of peace because you have to get through chaos to get through it. Superpower, I would say, is probably just seeing both sides of any situation. That can also be a negative, just because, like, gray areas are super gray. Like, black and white is not, like, I'm always thankful when things are black and white, because that I would rather be easy. But I can feel what other people feel, and so when they tell me this is why, then I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then the other side tells me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense too. So, like, you both have a point. And so sometimes a lot of times that's helpful in bringing people together and saying, well, you said this and you said this, but really you have these similarities, and so let's come together on that, even though you disagree on these other things.
And it means you're kind to everybody too.
I try.
because nobody is wrong or the enemy.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is really unique in our society right now, to find that. Somebody who can really, you have a point, so I can love you both.
Right.
Is a superpower, I think.
How I see that, sorry to interrupt,
No.
I was trying to take advantage of your cough.
I know, sorry.
I think it's a great superpower for community, because 9s tend to be, I'm going to use the term, 9s are sticky. people. They're people that when other people get around, they stick to them because they're so open and engaging, and they're disarming. They're actually, we'd had a conversation, kind of a pre-podcast interview when we did this, and one of the things Kara mentioned, and we may get to it later, but just the fact that nines, like threes also, they'll sit and they will listen to someone else talk, and they don't feel the need to interrupt, and will not talk unless they're asked to, until they have their space, where maybe an 8 would just keep going, or someone else might, a 1, whatever. I'm making up numbers at this point. But I
don't say anything above 9.
He's right. The 13 says they're very unlucky. But what I appreciate about, I do think it's a superpower. I mean, every superpower is also inverse our weakness as well. But man, to just be around people and to love them as people and to give them a lot of rope, I think it's fantastic, because that's not. I'll speak as for me, and it may not be an 8. I'm not like that. I tend to be a little more guarded, and I'm not trying to scope people out, but I'm not a gray. I'm more gray than I ever used to be, but I'm not like the world's gray. Let's just, I know you're married to an 8. There's a right and there's a wrong, and so I just so deeply appreciate hearing about that. I'm like, oh, one day I'll never be that.
Well, I love it too, because again, it is so different. I remember back, we called it creation school. What was it? It was the God and Science forum that we did about creation.
Yeah, faith and science.
And I just remember, because I love that. I'm like, let's look at each point of view and let's figure it out. And I know you'd love stuff like that too.
Sure, yeah.
And I remember Kara was like, we don't know the answer, and it's fine. Like, God's the creator, and that's what matters.
Right.
Kara's like, are we just going to go eat dinner afterwards?
Yes.
What are we going to do for dinner
I'm
afterwards?
here for the fellowship.
That's right.
Right. But that's amazing to me, because to me that fires me up. I love stuff like that. And it didn't make you uncomfortable, but
No.
that doesn't fire you up.
Yeah.
You're fine with gray, with I don't really know what the exact answer is to this.
Right. And it is unknown, so I don't feel the need to try to figure it out, because I can't.
By the way, when we say gray, we're not saying that a 9, when they see something in the Bible that says something's wrong, it kind of wonders, is that really wrong? That's not what the gray we're talking about. We're talking about all the things the scriptures don't speak to,
right.
where you have to use discernment, and people have just different convictions. They're just okay with a lot of people's different convictions and feel no need to be like, well, here's my conviction, might be a law, so where an 8 might go, yeah, well, your convictions are wrong, so I just appreciate that about a 9.
I do too. And I will say, Kara, you're one of the people who I know who cares the most about truth. So it's not that, like you're saying, not that 9s don't care about truth.
Right.
It's just that if it's gray, it's okay with you.
Right.
And for an 8, if it's gray, you're like, all right, it's gray, but let's talk about all the ways it could be, and let's figure it out.
Yeah.
It's just different. All right, so Yancey, tell me, you talked about at least a couple of the challenges. You can give a little bit more, or tell me also superpowers of an 8.
I think the superpower of an 8 is, I think that they can be, and I know that, I believe the 3s said this as well. I think it's also true of 8s. They can be incredibly focused. A lot of things that may bother other personality numbers, other Enneagram numbers, don't bother 8s as much, because 8s are very confident in their skill set, and so they're not worried about, how's this going to make everyone feel? Now, that can be a big negative, right? But it can also be incredible positive, that they're like, I know what I need to have to get done. I'm going to go do it. And I'm going to do it with as best as I can and try to work with people as best as I can. But I'm going to finish this. I'm going to complete this. And maybe that's tied to their desire for power and control. I also think they like to influence. 8s tend to be influencer. Anytime I've ever taken a personality test, I always top out as influencer. So I'm probably assuming 8s do a little bit of that, unless I've got something else going on. So I just think that there's a lot of, as far as to boil down their superpower, I think they're people that you can depend on. Said, here's a mission. I need you to take this mission. And they're like, let's go do it. I can do it. I'll get it done. And they don't dilly-dally around. They get hyper-focused, and I think that's a strength. Mm-hmm. That's a superpower. They have a lot, actually, but I don't want to say that.
He's like, how much time do we have? Okay, so I want to make sure we spend some time.
Well, before we go any further, would you resonate with that, or would you say that there's Because
Yeah.
you really are more studied in this than I would be. So I'd be remiss to not even ask, is there a different kind of, or an additional superpower, like one more that you would articulate that 8s are really good at that I missed on that?
Well, I was actually, while you were talking, I was thinking, is that me or not? Because we are really different.
Sure.
8s, of course. And I think, I don't know if influencer is, I don't think I would test as that. I think you have a lot more energy, and you're just a little bit different than I am. I would say one for me would be, in a different way, the ability to see the other side. So I think for an 8, it's the ability to see the other side, and then the boldness to try to make that happen. So we really aren't afraid of change. We're really not afraid of, even like we said, making decisions, making mistakes. If we believe in it, then we're going to go for it, and we're going to try to draw others into that. I think that's
Right.
a superpower of an 8 as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say now that I probably needed you to speak for it more than I did, so I could think about it more. But I think 8s are one of their superpowers. They can be champions for whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
if they believe in it, they're going to champion it, and they're not really swayed by everyone's emotion. I mean, they're very rational about, like, they can explain to you, this is why, this is the greatest thing here. Now, they get emotionally excited about it, and that's why they become great champions, because they're just not swayed by other people. They're not, and that's a good and a bad thing,
Right.
But they're not. They can't be very. They're really. They have Teflon when it comes to emotional manipulation. They're just not
Right.
really easily manipulated by people's emotions, and that doesn't mean that everyone's trying to manipulate them. But those that do try to, it just doesn't work for them. Like people that have the power of woo, they're like, hey, I can charm that person. You can't charm an 8. Generally speaking, you can't charm an 8 because they've got an inner set of convictions where someone might think these are all grays. They probably have a little more black and white, and if it's black and white to them, it doesn't really matter. You'd have to process and talk with them to work them out of that. And if you can't do that, well, then it's just you can't. You can try to strong arm them. Well, that would be even worse because 8s resist any kind of
Strong arming.
oh man, they can't do that. So
Yeah.
and I think that's a superpower. Again, every superpower has its own dark side to it, but generally
They
speaking,
definitely
there's some great time. Man, when the heat's on and people don't know what to do, 8s are like, I know what to do. Let's go do this. And so, and for a lot of other personalities, they want to hear that. They need someone to do that. So I think that's.
I remember talking to somebody one time, and they said, well, 8s don't care what people think about them. And I said, that's not true.
That's not true.
We definitely do. We just aren't going to be moved by it. Which I don't know if sometimes that's good and
Yeah.
sometimes it's not good.
That's right.
But whenever we do believe something, if someone doesn't like us for it, we're okay with that. And that's confusing to a lot of people. But I think that, again, can be a superpower and can also be negative like everything else.
But you also care what people think that are close to you that you trust.
Yeah.
Like that influences you to think
Definitely.
maybe I'm wrong. But if just some random person tells you something, you're like, I don't care that's not
Yeah.
That's not going to move me.
Right. Everyone's not going to like me.
Right.
Absolutely, though. I mean, we care deeply for people.
Right.
And about the people that we love. But
Yeah, I'm curious if 8s and 9s are similar in this respect, is that I know for 8s, they're incredibly loyal. And I know, just knowing Kara, and I'd assume she's fairly representative of 9s, they're fairly loyal. They're loyal too. So, I mean, loyalty's a big deal. It's a big deal. So it does matter what they 8s do care about what people think. I would probably argue they don't care about what everybody thinks.
Right.
yeah, right.
To the people to whom they're loyal, man, they really care what they think. But even that, if they still have a conviction about something,
Right.
like I care what you think, and and because I care, I'm gonna talk to you about why I'm gonna go this way, and you want me to go that way. But we're gonna have a conversation because I'm loyal to you. In fact, I interpret my loyalty as being honest with you.
Yeah.
And but where I just think there's some common ground between 8s and 9s, and I'm sure a ton of other Enneagrams, but I mean loyalty is a huge thing,
Right.
Yeah.
huge thing.
8s, 9s, and 13s, all of them.
8s, 9s, and those unlucky 13s.
Okay, so I want to talk about spiritual growth grid. I'm going to spend some time on that. This is one of the primary ways we just think about spiritual growth in our church. It begins with who God is and what he's done for us, and then goes through what that means about our identity and what we're called to. So once we become a disciple of Jesus, once we repent and believe, then we have these whole new identities. When you think about the Enneagram, which is not your identity, it's just describes some of your characteristics. How does that affect how you think of yourself as a citizen in God's kingdom, who is called to listen and obey God? Because that's sort of the first line. We're citizens in God's kingdom, and we listen and obey Him. So how does that work within your own personality traits?
I would say for me, it's knowing myself, like spending the time. Like when I first got to this church, when I wanted to serve, I'm like, I don't know what my gifts are. Like Doug's gifts are obvious. He's got so many. Like why I don't know what mine are. And so I felt called to figure that out, to know how God wired me, and like not just be, bland Kara that doesn't know and just cares about other people so much that she doesn't even, how can you serve them if you don't even know yourself? And so for me, it was just examining like how do I use my gifts the way that God created me to help the kingdom? Mm-hmm. And so that's just probably a constant thing, and being in relationships and gospel community has helped me to see ways that I can help and ways that I can be used, and then listening to that.
Yeah. I'm like, please don't call yourself bland, Kara. Oh my goodness. Not going to interrupt you.
Let that 8 come save you. Let that 8 come save you.
No.
Right,
Oh
exactly.
my goodness gracious.
Right.
What about you, Yancey, when it comes to listening and obeying? How is it maybe hard for your personality, or, what does that look like for you?
I think in ways it's not very hard, because there's a direct line of command, and an 8 receives that. Like 8's like, again, if control's important to them, they know that ultimately if they're in a kingdom, that's the king, he's in control, and I think they're okay as long as it's clear lines, like that's the guy I'm following. But at the same time, it becomes the tension in their own hearts is like, but I have a very good idea about how I want my life to be. Mm-hmm. And there are just going to be times where, and many times in your own sanctification, that you're growing in what it looks like to live as a citizen of the kingdom of God it's not intuitive to you, right? When it says turn the other cheek, or pray for your enemies and love your enemies, or, so on and so forth. Your internal, like, this is right and wrong, needs to be recalibrated. And that's hard. That's where you really need the Holy Spirit, because 8s are so dogged about what they believe is right and true that even reading it in the scriptures, I mean, you can read it and they want to believe that that's the right way to do it. I think they mentally believe that it's right. They're just trusting in their heart, like, this is the better way, because 8s are very confident what they think the better way is for them. And so if being out of control is one of their fears, well, listen, there's only one Lord, and there can't be two. And so that's where 8's going to have to really work. Now, once they finally yield to it, they're amazing, because they stay with it, right? It's getting them there that can be the hard part.
Yeah. Surrender is the pathway to real obedience and fruit, and that can be hard.
And while that's true for every person,
right, sure,
some of our personalities, like 8's, may have a harder time with it. That's why I'm saying they're amazing once they can get over that hill. They just have to get over the hill. So.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. For me, it's also how I listen and obey. So, because there are lots of things, like you guys have both been talking about, a lot of the strengths are also weaknesses. And so when I'm honest with myself, okay, these are some of the challenges for me, like you're talking about, I can still be a challenger, but also see how God calls me in His Word to be a challenger, which is to be humble, to be sacrificial, to be gentle, to give honor to the leaders who are set above me. So it just changes what it looks like whenever I'm living into my 8ness, if I'm going to listen and obey well. Yeah. What about loving and serving? So as a 9, how do you love and serve your new family that you're adopted into through Jesus?
I would say one way is through conflict, in both helping people that are in conflict, like I said earlier, and like coming alongside and saying, okay, well, the other person said this, or can you, finding common ground in that, but then also allowing conflict in my life and working through it instead of running away from it. And I know ideally, that's the only way to restore relationships, and that's what God calls us to do. And so there won't be reconciliation if you don't actually allow the conflict to happen and work through it. And so that's one way that I've grown and just appreciate it, and definitely don't run to it. But if I know that it's there, then I absolutely engage in it because I want to get to the other side. And I know for my peace, I need that, even though it's hard in the middle of it. But that's, my community needs me to do that. And so
It's loving.
Right.
It really is the only way to love well.
Right.
What about you, Yancey, when it comes to loving and serving and your personality type?
Well, first, let me just say, I would think 9s are really built well for loving and serving in community. I mean, I've known Kara and you and I both have known her for years. When I think of other 9s, again, I think of them as kind of sticky. They're the glue. They're really built well for it. I'm not too sure. So I think 8s get a hard rap. They get a bad rap for community because they're truth tellers, and there are a lot of other personalities that think, now is not the time to tell that kind of truth. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. So I think the way 8s can contribute to loving and serving, because we're a gospel family, excuse me, is by telling the truth. The catch for the downfall for the 8s, the Achilles heel, is not ever the what, it's always the how. And so my personal struggles over the last, 40 years of being a Christian is trying to grow in, trying to teach myself the how matters, the how matters, the how matters. Not just like, hey, I need to tell you this truth because I love you. And I'll tell you the truth that everyone else is thinking, but no one's got the guts to tell you. I'll tell you that truth because I love you. But oftentimes, excuse me, if I'm not careful, I'm just going to tell it in the way that I'd want it to be. I'm just going to tell you the black and white of it. Like, you've done this, instead of just considering that person also has feelings, and no one wants to be called out, and everyone wants to feel loved. And so I could say the exact same content, but just put a bow on it. But that's not selling out. And that's what 8s tend to think. It's like, man, I'm selling out. No, it's not. It's because you love them and you're trying to say something to them in the best way they can hear it. The irony is I'm a preacher. What I get paid for more than anything else is standing up in a pulpit and preaching and saying things in a way that are true, but also in a way that people can best hear them. Like I coach people and you need to think about how to put this in a way where people can best receive it. But it's the challenge is when I'm just being, outside of that, talking to people like, hey, Kara, da 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 da, and just thinking, surely the way I'm saying this is loving, but it very well may not be. It's, again, 8s tend to be very direct. And I just want everyone to understand, they're not intentionally trying to make anyone angry or to not love them well. They just tend to, I think every other number, they interpret their world the way that they see it. Right. And so they're just thinking, you live with an 8, right? So I'm sure
if
that
I love you, right. I will be direct with you.
Right. And so the biggest learn for me, or one of the biggest learns for me, is in trying to love and serve, is to understand that love isn't only telling the truth, it's telling the truth in a loving way. And so that just means just take 5 seconds and go, what's the best way that Kara can hear this or that Rachel can hear this? And that's all that it takes. But just even that feels like that takes too long. I want to just tell them this, right? Because what they need, 8s have almost this impulse that everything has to happen now. We don't need to wait around. Let's just keep going.
They do. They don't almost have that impulse.
Right. Yeah. So that's at least one learn is because if not, 8s are going to be seen as people who are overly critical, and that really hurts community. And so you have 9s that'll put up with them. But you'll have other numbers, people who have personalities that they just struggle with 8s. And part of that's just, we're just different people. But they struggle with them because they're like, those people are just, golly, they're a drag. When the 8's like, oh, no, it's great. It's like, hey, those are the learns. That's some of the learns.
Yeah, I think a lot of what both of you guys are saying is just super, super helpful. Even listening to you talk about what nines bring and how they can love well, our gospel family. I'm really thinking through you and all the other nines here who just do that so well. And I'll say one of the big learns for me, just whether it's, again, Enneagram or any sort of like trying to understand myself and how God wired me, is being okay that that's not me.
Right.
Because I think I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that a lot of times if you are a woman and you're an 8 or a personality like that, it can feel tough because you feel like, well, to be a Christian especially, I should be this way.
Right.
I need to be more like Kara, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not Kara, and I think to recognize that that's never going to happen. God wired me just completely differently. It's a good thing because we need each other.
Right, exactly. That's why you surround yourself with different people.
Right.
So, like, I need you to show me how to do things, and you need me, and
Yeah,
but to appreciate you for that and not,
not think you need to be that way or not resent it, but just love each other in our uniqueness and like all the different gifts that God gave us in the body.
Yeah.
It's really, it can be amazing, but it's like you have to understand, well, how did God wire you?
Right.
Or else you're going to be, like you said, trying to do, like maybe not doing anything or trying to do the wrong thing instead of living into how God created you to be and what he created you to do. And speaking of that, the last one I want to work through is just how are you missional? So we're ambassadors for Christ. We are on mission to go and make fully devoted followers of Jesus. So how do you do that as a 9? What does it look like as an 8? Is it different?
I'll let you finish it because this is an easy one, I think, for me. At least one of the things. 8s don't mind having intense conversations with seekers. They don't mind having hard conversations. They're not flustered when, I'm going to speak generally speaking. 8s aren't flustered. They're actually energized by hard conversations, by debate. If someone gets emotional, it doesn't fluster them at all. They're like, oh, we're finally getting somewhere. When I have conversations with people that are not Christians and they want to ask hard questions and they even get emotional about it, I'm probably more alive than in any other moment because I'm like, oh, this is real. This feels real. And I'm not intimidated by anything they say or anything they do. And they don't feel that I'm not powering up with them. I'm just looking them in the eye, and we're going to have a conversation. And there's a without trying to be triumphalistic with 8s, there is a fearlessness that 8s tend to have that can be seen as kind of bullheaded. They're a little too bullheadish, if you will. But oftentimes they're more than willing to have really. They're more than willing to have conversations with lost people where other personalities might be intimidated to it, might be fearful of it. They're not fearful. That can be a good and bad thing, but as far as like serving the kingdom, they can really be good missionaries because they're pioneering. They're somewhat entrepreneurial just in their emotions. They're like, hey, let's just go get it. And they're never, I don't want to say never, and maybe because they may have a false confidence, I don't know. But when someone asks them a question about Jesus, they don't hyperventilate. They're like, hey, let's talk about this. That's what I've seen generally, and I don't just say that for me. I say that for any other 8 that I know. Whether you or your husband and other 8s, they're willing to. They're the ones that everyone else feels awkward about because they're having this real intense conversation, usually with some other 8s, and everyone thinks they're mad at each other, and they're just talking. And so I think
that's never happened.
Yeah. So I think that's a strength when it comes to going and multiplying, which is that third storyline of the gospel for our identity as missionaries. They're good for those kinds of things, for the kind of the debate-ish. I really have to think. We have a lot of engineers here, so that they really want to argue through things. 8s are good for that. I'm not saying there's no one else is, just 8s are good for that.
No, yeah, that is a great. I had never thought about that, but that is so true. Yeah. I mean, you can think through, and you can think on your feet, and so, for me, that would be paralyzing. Or not that I wouldn't engage in the conversation, but it would definitely not be as smooth and I don't know.
8s are generally fast processors.
Yeah.
So when you have someone giving you a lot of stuff, they're thinking like this all the time. It's,
Right.
You know, they're processing units just fast, not better, just fast.
Right.
As opposed to other 9s potentially where it's like, no, I need a longer thought process to go on here. Now I'm going to come up probably to the same answer, but I've got to work through it differently.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I would say for 8s.
Yeah. What about you?
I would say yes. I create a space where I can do it more naturally for me. And so for me, that would be in student ministry, leading a group of girls. I've been doing it for many years, and it's just more of a natural where you can have one-on-one conversations or smaller group conversations that it's in an environment where it's expected. And so like they're here to learn about Jesus. And so it's not me just going out and saying, hey, do you know who Jesus is? You know, like they're there. I know why they're there. They know why they're there. That's a lot of theirs. And so that just already takes down barriers for me. And then also just like, I love community. And so I can love and listen and, have hospitality, invite them to the house for things and, go for coffee. That's more natural for me to love people and to show them who Jesus is instead of just, I don't know, finding a random person that I've never met.
Yeah, I love
that's
that.
super hard for me.
Because we need that. I mean, our church needs everything that you have to offer. So to understand where you're comfortable and where your gifts
I feel like
are
you're
gonna be
trying to
stewarded.
counsel her. Like, it's okay.
No.
It's okay.
There's just so many people I know who are listening who are like, I don't know.
Right.
Where should I be serving? How can I be on mission if I'm not Yancey?
Oh, no. See, I think it's the opposite for me. How I think about it is like when I listen to Kara talk as a 9, I'm like, oh, we need about 3 people who are 8s, and we need 97 people who are 9s. Only because in the end, I mean, so I would think of 8s, they're more like informational evangelism. They're great at information, right? But 9s are amazing at relational evangelism. And we really, that's what most people need. I mean, even the most educated, articulate, argumentative kind of intellectuals, when you love on them,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus didn't say that you'll know them by their intellect. You'll know them by their love. So now, to be fair, 8s are trying to love the way that they're trying to by
Right.
talking about this. Just when I listen to you, I'm like,
yeah.
oh, this is the kind of like, this is what I want my kids to. That's why I think 9s can be incredibly effective at evangelism because they create environments relationally where people can feel safe and
Seen.
loved. Transparent, and that you're there for the long haul. Like I'm ready to go to the next deal. Like, hey, it's good to talk to you. See ya.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important too because so we are talking in generalities.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely.
And we're talking about stereotypes and these big characteristics that we have as this type of person. But of course, like you cannot follow Jesus and not be in relationship and love well and be vulnerable and be kind and be humble and be sacrificial. Just like, you also have to understand your faith and be able to defend your faith.
And speak
especially
truth.
and speak truth in the world that we live in. You have to have all that. But knowing that maybe it's not where you lean to helps you to live into your gifts and to know where your weaknesses are. So you can like walk alongside other people who also have the strengths like we've been saying. So
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think that the aim of using the Enneagram, at least in this respect, is not to typecast you, but it is to free you up to go, it's good the way God wired me. And there's a multiplicity and a variety of gifts and abilities and talents and wirings, and we need all of them. And so if anything, just this whole conversation that we've had is just to recognize that all of these unique wirings, God uses them in this kaleidoscope to put into play how we can best love and serve and go and multiply and listen and obey and just be better followers of Jesus. I like listening to other people because it helps me to appreciate them all the more. And it's also just good to have friends, good friends, close friends in your circle that are not like you.
Right.
If we're going to use the numbers, that 8s need 9s and 9s need 3s, and 3s need. It's just good because it just reminds us of the goodness of God. 1 Corinthians, where we're all put together from different parts of the body. So, if anything, I just listening to Kara, I love 9s all the more because they do things that I'm just not as good at and still called to do.
Right.
So.
Okay, so we've ended all the podcasts with the same question. So tell me, or tell everyone listening, how can we, if someone's hearing this and they're like, oh, I'm married to an 8, and they don't even know, someone like an 8 or someone like a 9, how can we better love them if someone has these sort of personalities or characteristics in our life? Kara, you start.
I would say just that 9s want to be known. I mean, I think that's another desire, even though we don't know ourselves all as completely as we should. And so, but we're not going to make ourselves known. Like, we're not, if I'm in a large group, I'm not going to throw out conversation or questions or jump in the middle of somebody talking, or, I will wait until there's a space for me to talk. And so if you are in a relationship with a 9, a friendship, whatever, just being intentional in getting to know them, but also knowing, like Yancey was saying, we are slow processors. I think for me, I don't know if it's all 9s, but for me, I am so busy listening, whereas 8s are like listening, but also thinking at the same time. For me, I am like so engaged in listening and remembering and knowing who I'm talking to that I have nothing ready to respond. Or, I mean, like, I might be able to answer or ask a follow-up question, but like, I just want to listen well. And so if you ask me a question, I might be really slow to answer it, or may not know right away, or maybe not even know it about myself. So I think that's pretty true for 9s.
It's really helpful for me. I mean, that's super helpful.
Oh, it is.
Advice.
It is because I've had enough engagements with 9s, and I would argue my wife, who she is a 1. I hope I said that correctly, or I'll hear from it later on. You guys would know. She's also a slow processor, and so I'd almost say they're regular processors. 8s tend to be fast. That's all. And so what I've learned is, like, she's good enough to tell me I need some time to think about that, which is helpful for me because I'm thinking like, come on, you haven't responded, and I'm interpreting that as you don't care.
Right.
And she's like, no, I care. I just need some time to think through that. And what's always inevitable is that when she comes to a conclusion, it's very well thought through. It's probably to a better conclusion than I came to, because I did mine in 4 milliseconds. She did hers in 4 seconds, and it's much better. And I just have to learn how to do that in a way where one's not right or wrong. We just have to learn how to work in a way that enhances each other to the max. That's all. Remind me of the question, what do people need to know about us to...
Yeah, how can we best love someone like Yancey?
Oh, man, say 8s, don't say Yancey.
Whether we're thinking about someone who we're trying to reach for the kingdom, or someone in our gospel family, whatever it is, how do we do that?
Well, obviously, I'll give an answer, and I'd love for you to follow up as an 8, especially since we're closing this out, and I know you think deeply about it. But I think for me, I'll say, just in the past, people who've done this well, where I've resonated with, is when they give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm not trying to be mean or short or dismissive of them. I'm focused. I'm intensely thinking. I mean, the 8s are, at least that I know of, are intense thinkers. And so sometimes what that looks like is I just don't care. When the truth is, I probably care more deeply than anyone else in that room about the things that we're doing. I'm just trying to. I live in it. And so the great thing is that it's passionate, right? It's one of my pride. I think one of the strengths I bring to the pulpit. But that same kind of intensity also can be intimidating and, frankly, off-putting, because people think that you're mad at. I once had a lady tell me one time, just call me out of the blue in the lobby. I'm just walking through the lobby, and she's like, hey, can I talk with you? I'm like, yeah. She's like, why are you angry at me? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, you looked at me and you look like you're angry at me. I'm like, I'm not angry at you at all. I'm just thinking intensely. So
every 8 has heard that before.
And I've had to tell people ahead of time, listen, I have this kind of a face that means 8s aren't good at hiding they're not good at hiding anything, because they're just trying to be who they are. And at least that's how they interpret that. And so I'm I'm just thinking deeply, and my deep thinking face looks like I'm mad.
I actually had. They were like, you were looking me right in the eye, and it was really intense. And I was like, oh, I was just thinking. I really was just thinking.
Yeah, and eights are big thinkers in that. They live in their head. So I think one of the better ways to live with eights is to give them the benefit of the doubt that they want to do the right thing. And so I told you guys this. Bruce and I have worked together for now a quarter of a century. Bruce is a 3, and he has to. We joke about he has to put up with me because I'm an 8, and I'm a contrarian, a challenger, and one of the things where anytime Bruce has had to correct me, and I've needed correction. I mean, everyone does, but he's pulled me aside, and one of the first things he says is like, I know that you didn't mean to come across like this, or I know that you really love people, and I know that you want to do the right thing. And that alone, just that, is like, oh, cool. So you can tell me anything you want, because he knows once he tells me something that I've done that's not been good or it's been wrong, he knows I'm going to beat myself up. Like he knows eights have a hard time getting over doing something that they thought was wrong because they're trying to do their best to do the right thing. But the fact that he just acknowledges, hey man, I give you the benefit of the doubt. I know you, and I know that you love this, that, or the other, and maybe you should have done it this way. And he doesn't even have to say maybe. I should have done it that way. And that. And then he can say whatever hard thing he has to say to me. And eights can take that kind of stuff, but I don't. I'm still going to take it personally, but I feel loved. I feel loved when someone gives me the benefit of the doubt, going, I know that if we're going to use like when I think of eights, I think of an animal like they're the lions. I know you're going to roar, and I know you when everyone else is just kind of talking, you're roaring, and you don't think you're roaring, but you are. And I just want we know what you're talking about. Just think through how you're doing this. That's just so helpful for me because I'm blind to my own blindness, and so that's, I think, giving eights the benefit of the doubt and just acknowledging that, hey man, I know you meant the right thing. That just gives the eights a sense of like, oh, they don't think I'm the worst person in the room, or that I'm trying to strong arm everybody, or that I don't care about this person's feelings. I do. I just don't express that in the way that they express it. That's been, I don't know what else you would add to that. There's a lot of other things I'm curious you would add, but that's been super gracious or super helpful for me, and that kind of grace been shown to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great answer. I concur.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here. It really was a great conversation, and love you both a lot. You're very unique personalities, and I hope this was a helpful conversation for everybody. I think it will be.
Yeah, well, we love you too. Thank you for the conversation.
Rachel.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out ClearCreekResources.org, where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.